The winter wind swept through the Wyoming valley, carrying the scent of ash and old memories. Caleb Porter, a cowboy who'd lost everything to drought, received a letter from his late uncle, along with a rusted key. When he reached Whitestone Ranch, the place lay in ruin, quiet as a grave. But inside the collapsed barn, a faint breath stirred. The horse was still alive, waiting for him to come home. The road into northern Wyoming was little more than a scar of mud and gravel cutting through a land of wind and silence. Caleb Porter rode it alone, the brim of his hat pulled low against the cold. His horse's hooves struck hollow against the frozen ground, the sound fading into the wide emptiness that stretched for miles. The sky hung low, gray and heavy, like an old blanket ready to give way. Inside his coat, folded against his heart, lay a letter written in a lawyer's clean hand and sealed with a red stamp. He'd read it enough times to know it by heart. Jeremiah Porter, deceased, names you his sole heir and successor to Whitestone Ranch, Sweetwater County, Wyoming. Beneath that, a single iron key had been tied with twine, old, rusted, but solid. Caleb had turned it in his fingers every night since the day the letter came. He didn't remember much of his uncle, just a tall, silent man who'd once given him a pocket knife and told him to keep it sharp like your word. That was 25 years ago. Now both the knife and the word felt dull. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of snow and cedar smoke. Ahead, through the haze, he saw the ranch at last. Whitestone lay in a shallow valley, the remains of a once proud spread. The fences sagged, the barn leaned, and the main house crouched behind bare cottonwoods, like a weary old man. A crooked gate stood at the entrance, its white paint long since stripped by years of weather. Across the top beam, the word Whitestone was carved deep but faded, a relic of better days. Caleb stopped his horse, just looking. The land was beautiful in a hard way. Nothing soft about it, nothing forgiving. He exhaled, watching his breath rise in the still air. So this is it, he muttered. Home, I guess. He swung down and walked to the gate. The chain was locked with a heavy padlock, orange with rust. From his pocket, he pulled the iron key. The metal bit cold into his fingers as he fit it into the lock. It turned with a shriek like something waking from a long sleep, and the gate gave way, swinging open with a sigh that echoed through the valley. Inside, the air smelled of wet dirt and hay gone to rot. He led his horse down the rutted drive toward the barn, every creak of leather and clop of hoof the only sign of life. The silence pressed in on him until it almost rang in his ears. The house came first. A 2-story frame, windows busted, porch half collapsed. The front door swayed slightly in the wind, tapping against the jamb like a metronome. He tied his horse to a post that still looked steady and stepped up the porch steps. They groaned under his boots. Inside, dust hung in the air like smoke. A table sat overturned in what had been the parlor. A rocking chair lay on its side. On the mantel, a framed photograph still stood upright. A man and a woman beside a horse, both smiling toward the sun. The glass was cracked clean through the middle. Caleb lifted the frame, wiped a thumb over the image. You must have done all right once, he whispered. What happened to you, old man? He set the photo down and turned toward the barn. Something in him, habit or instinct, needed to know if there was any sign of life left. The door was half off its hinges, the wood swollen and dark with age. When he pushed it open, a smell hit him hard, wet straw, mold, and something else beneath it, something alive. He froze, listened. A sound drifted out from the darkness inside, the slow shuffle of hooves against earth. Then, faint and uncertain, a low whicker. Caleb's chest tightened. He eased a step closer. Easy, he murmured, the word barely more than breath. Ain't here to hurt nobody. The light from the doorway spilled across the floor in a narrow beam, touching a shape in the far corner. Eyes caught the light, amber and deep. The horse stepped forward, ribs showing through a dull chestnut coat, mane tangled with burrs. It looked half ghost, half miracle. Behind it, something moved again, two smaller shapes pressed close together. "Lord," Caleb breathed, "you ain't alone, are you?" He took another step, slow, careful. The lead horse stamped once, muscles quivering, but didn't retreat. Caleb held out a hand. The air between them felt tight as a drawn wire. When his palm met the animal's muzzle, it was warm. The horse shivered, then leaned into the touch. Caleb let his hand rest there, feeling the tremor of life under skin. "Easy now," he whispered. "It's all right." The creature exhaled a long breath, as if it had been holding it for years. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling loose boards and stirring a faint ring from a hanging bridle. Caleb stepped back and looked around. The barn was bigger than it seemed from outside. Empty stalls stretched into shadow, old tack hanging like cobwebs. And yet, there was movement, a pulse in the air that said something had kept this place breathing. He crouched near the straw. It was fresh, or nearly so. Someone had been here not long ago. He turned toward the door, scanning the yard. The house sat dark, the hills beyond silent. Still, a prickle ran down his spine. He looked back at the horse. Its gaze met his, calm but watchful, as if it too was listening. The gelding's ears flicked toward the back wall. From somewhere behind the stall came a faint noise, a thud, then another. Caleb moved quietly, hand resting on the butt of his revolver. He eased around the corner. The light barely reached that far. For a moment, he saw nothing but the shifting black of shadow. Then came a sound he'd never forget, the weak, high-pitched nicker of a foal. He crouched instantly, heart hammering. In a small pen, half hidden under a broken rail, lay a newborn colt, legs folded awkwardly beneath its body. Its breathing was shallow, its eyes half closed. The mare, he realized now the lead horse was a mare, snorted behind him, protective but not hostile. Caleb backed off slowly and let her move forward. She nosed the colt, nickering softly, and the little thing tried to rise but couldn't quite find its footing. Caleb felt something in his chest crack open, the smallest piece of warmth in the long, cold ruin of his life. He knelt in the straw beside them, speaking quietly. "You've been fighting to keep this one alive, haven't you? All this time." The mare blinked slowly, as if answering. Outside, the last light of day faded from the sky, and the barn fell into that blue half-dark where things felt possible again. Caleb took off his gloves, stroked the mare's neck, then gathered a few broken boards to block the wind from the doorway. The air grew still, heavy with the smell of earth and animal breath. He leaned back against the stall and let the fatigue take him. The key to the ranch hung around his neck, warm now against his skin. "Guess we're all that's left," he murmured. "You, me, and the ghosts." The mare lifted her head, ears twitching toward the open door. The wind had gone quiet, but another sound rode beneath it, a faint crunch of boots on frozen ground. Caleb straightened, every muscle tensed. He reached for his revolver again. The steps stopped just outside the barn. Then came a voice, muffled but clear. "Hello? Anyone here?" A woman's voice. Caleb eased toward the door, revolver low by his thigh. The mare flicked an ear but didn't stir from the foal. The barn drifted in a hush so complete he could hear the tiny rattle of grain rolling in an old tin pail. "I'm coming out," he called. "Don't spook." Snow flurries swirled through the open gap as he stepped into the yard. A woman sat her sorrel mare like she'd been born there, loose in the hips, heels down, quiet hands. Her coat was the plain brown kind doctors wore when they didn't want trouble, and a leather bag hung from her saddle horn. "I'm looking for Whitestone," she said. "The storm hit hard on the ridge. I saw smoke from the valley and thought, well, figured an open door meant folks lived here." "Depends what you mean by lived," Caleb said, lowering the gun. "Place is mine, far as the paper says. Name's Caleb Porter." She tipped her brim. "Nora Reyes. I'm a veterinarian of sorts. I doctor people when I have to." Her eyes slid to the barn. "You've got horses in there." "How'd you know?" "I can smell them." A faint smile tugged at one corner of her mouth. "And I heard the soft kind of nicker, the one mares use when they don't want to wake a new one." Caleb blinked. "You ride in often teaching a man about his own barn?" "Only when he's new to it," she said, unruffled. "May I?" He stood aside. "If you spook her, you'll answer to me." "I'll answer to her first." They moved into the blue light of the doorway. The mare lifted her head and watched Nora approach. The woman went slow. No sudden gestures, no staring straight at the eyes. She crouched and turned her shoulder, letting the mare smell her sleeve. "Easy, Mama," she whispered. "Show me what hurts." The foal lay tucked like a folded coat, breathing quick and shallow. Nora's hands worked gentle, practical, checking gums, lifting a hoof, fingers pressing the thin chest where ribs made sharp shadows. "He's weak from cold and hunger," she said. "Not sick, not yet." "Can you help?" Caleb asked. "I can try. We need warmth and sugar." She pulled a small tin from her bag, mixed a slurry in a dented cup, and slid it to the foal's mouth with 2 fingers. "Just a taste," she murmured. "That's it." The foal swallowed, coughed, swallowed again. The mare blew a soft breath into Nora's hair, as if testing her. "Somebody kept these animals alive longer than neglect should allow," Nora said, glancing around the stalls. "See this straw? It's not black with rot. Someone turned it, and that bucket, fresh scrape marks from a knife cutting ice." Caleb felt the old prickle at the back of his neck. "I thought I heard boots earlier." "Maybe you did." Nora straightened. "But whoever was here cares more for the animals than their own sleep. There's purpose in this mess." They worked side by side as the light thinned. Caleb dragged a half door shut to block the wind. Nora dug blankets out of her saddlebags and lined the foal's pen. They found a handful of old oats and a stack of grass hay under a tarp, half-molded at the edges but decent at the core. The mare chewed with the weary gratitude of the starving. "What brought you in with a storm brewing?" he asked. "Calls," she said simply. "There's never enough coin for a proper doctor in Sweetwater, so folks get me. Heard tell of a fever downriver. Checked a cow with a stubborn breech this morning. Stitched a miner's hand afternoon. Then the sky turned mean, and the ridge kicked me toward your gate." He grunted, impressed despite himself. "You patch anything that bleeds?" "Mostly. I draw the line at politics." She reached into the foal's mouth again, then nodded. "He'll be hungry now. We warm water and cut the oats fine." Caleb fetched his canteen and set a pot on a ring of fire bricks that had once held a forge. The water steamed slow, sending thin ghosts into the rafters. When the foal finally stood, trembling, knees wobbling like willows in a wind, Nora smiled, small and quiet, as if she'd seen a prayer answered and didn't want to scare it off. They named nothing, not yet, but life felt named anyway. "Where's the well?" she asked after a time. "If we don't keep them drinking tonight, they'll go down hard when the cold really bites." Caleb led her out into the dusk. The yard spread flat and pale, snow licking at the ground like a cautious fire. The well sat beyond a stand of cottonwoods, a low stone ring with a wooden cap. He lifted the lid, and the air that rose was knife cold. A sheen of ice silvered the top, thin but growing. Nora knelt, running her hand along the stone rim. Her fingers stopped at a patch the color of wet ash. "Look," she said. A handprint stained the stone. Big palm, long fingers, still damp enough to glisten. It hadn't been there long. "Whoever came," Caleb said, voice low, "was here after the air started freezing." He scanned the cottonwoods, the ridge, the broken fence lines. Nothing moved but snow and the creeping dark. "You think they'll be back?" "If they care about the horses, yes," Nora said. "If they care about you, maybe not." He didn't bother to ask which he should hope for. They chipped ice and hauled water until their arms burned. Back in the barn, the mare drank deep, lifted her head, and drank again. The foal nursed clumsily, and when he finished, he stood steadier on his long, ridiculous legs. The sound of it, the quiet suck and swallow, the soft thud of a tail against a plank, filled the barn with a peace Caleb had not felt since before the fever took his wife. He let himself sink to the straw. "You ever seen a place come back?" he asked. Nora's eyes tracked the rafters, then the mare, then him. "Sometimes it doesn't come back, not the way it was," she said. "Sometimes it turns into something else and you only recognize it by the way it keeps you warm." He looked at her then, really looked, at the wind-bitten curve of her cheek, the bit of snow caught in her dark hair, the steady work of her hands. "You talk like a preacher." "I talk like somebody who's had to learn her sermons while riding," she said. They shared coffee from a battered tin mug, passing it back and forth. Nora told him about the winter 3 years ago when a blizzard trapped a whole herd in a dry wash, and men had to dig a trench with shovels to lead them out one by one. Caleb told her how the river on his old place retreated into the earth, inch by inch, until cattle bawled themselves hoarse and his wife coughed herself empty in a house that smelled of sage and sweat and hope gone brittle. By full dark, the storm had settled, a dry snow that whispered over the yard. Caleb hung a lantern high. Its light stroked the mare's face and found the path of old scars across her shoulder, white lines where a rope had burned deep and long ago. "Someone worked her hard," Nora said softly. "She's done more than her share of hauling regret." "You know the kind, do you?" "We all do," she said. They checked the house next. Caleb's idea of courage was to walk into the ruin with a woman at his side. The rooms held the husks of someone else's days. A child's wooden horse on a windowsill, the broken shadow of a cradle, a Bible with pressed wildflowers that fell like brown moths when he opened it. On the back of the bedroom door, someone had carved a line with a nail. "Keep them safe." Nora traced the words with a fingertip. "Your uncle?" "Maybe," Caleb said. "Maybe the last soul who still believed words could hold the roof up." They brought blankets back to the barn. Nora showed him how to braid straw into a makeshift windbreak, how to wrap a strip of gunny around the foal's chest to keep the edge off, how to listen with your hands for the heat that says a body wants to live. When her sorrel stamped in the yard, Nora went to check her and came back smiling. "Even she knows this is church." "Church?" Caleb said, surprised. "Where else do you go to promise something you're not sure you can pay?" Late, when the wind fell flat and the world held its breath, Caleb dragged a clean tarp across the doorway and set the lantern low. The mare stood with her muzzle over the foal's neck, her breath fogging the air in little puffs. The barn creaked as it settled. Somewhere a loose hook tapped wood with a slow, patient rhythm. Nora cinched her coat and rubbed her hands. "I'll sleep in the saddle if I have to, but that cot in the tack room would feel like sin." "It's yours," he said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded, then paused at the tack room door. "You'll need help, Caleb. This isn't a two-hands job. I don't care what the deed says." "I know," he said. "I don't even know what I've got yet." "You've got a mare and a foal, and you've got a well that remembers kindness," she said. "Tomorrow we see what else is breathing." She disappeared into the little room. Caleb settled on an upturned bucket near the stall, hat pulled low, coat collar raised. He must have drifted, one of those thin sleeps that barely holds, because the next sound felt like a hand on his shoulder. Hoofbeats. Not the mare shifting, not the foal's clumsy scrabble. Distant. Many. The kind that run together into a single drumline that you feel in your ribs. Caleb stood, every nerve awake. He blew the lantern down until the barn was a dim mouth of shadow. Snow dusted the threshold like flour. Out beyond the yard, past the cottonwoods, something moved across the white. He counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. No, more. The rhythm swelled, then slowed, as if the earth itself were breathing. Caleb? Nora's voice came soft from the darkness behind him. He lifted a hand for quiet and stared into the night. The hoofbeats stopped. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like someone had set it down between the trees and dared him to break it. Snow sifted through the air, soft as ash, and the cottonwoods whispered against one another. Caleb squinted into the dark. A shape flickered, then vanished beyond the far fence. He stood still, breath shallow, waiting for the sound again. Nothing came. Even the wind had gone to ground. Behind him, Nora stepped closer, her lantern held low. The light caught on her cheekbones, gold in the pale blue dark. "What is it?" she whispered. "Could be deer," Caleb said, though he didn't believe it. "Could be someone checking what they didn't finish." She tilted her head toward the ridge. "You've got neighbors?" "Not the friendly kind." They waited another moment. When nothing stirred, Caleb sighed through his nose and eased the barn door closed. The horses settled again, their movements soft and tired. The foal, belly round from its first real meal, lay asleep in the straw. Nora set the lantern back on its hook. If it was someone watching, they know this place isn't empty anymore. He nodded. Then we keep the fire low and the doors barred. The night dragged long. Caleb dozed in short snatches, gun within reach, while the storm whispered around the eaves. Every creak of timber felt like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounded like a man's breath. When morning came, gray and raw, it didn't bring comfort. The yard was buried ankle-deep in snow. Tracks wound through it, boot prints heading from the back of the barn toward the woods. Nora crouched beside them, tracing one with a gloved finger. "Too big for mine, too square for yours. You were right. Someone's been here." Caleb looked at the trail disappearing into the trees. "They didn't take anything." "They will," she said, standing. "If this herd's what I think it is." He frowned. "What do you think it is?" "Mustangs," she said, nodding toward the mare and foal. "Not wild, not tame. Bloodlines from the cavalry stock they released years back. The government breeds used to carry their mark. See that white patch on her flank? Shaped like an arrowhead? That's no accident." "So what's that worth?" Nora's gaze drifted toward the hills. "More than a year's wages to the right buyer. Enough to make a man claim another's land." Caleb felt a bitter laugh rise. "I guess that makes sense of the gate chain and the note on the fence. My uncle left me a fight, not a ranch." They spent the day working anyway. The sky stayed the color of tin. They patched holes in the barn roof and set feed for the horses. Nora brewed coffee over a small stove she'd rigged from scrap metal. The scent filled the space, mixing with hay and leather. When the sun dropped low, Caleb rode the boundary fence, checking for breaks. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, gunpowder maybe, but the wind carried it away before he could place it. By the time he returned, Nora had lit a lantern in the barn. She stood by the mare, stroking the animal's neck. The horse leaned into her touch, eyes half closed. "She trusts you," Caleb said, stepping inside. "Animals usually do." Nora answered softly. People are harder. Caleb managed a smile. I'll keep that in mind. She turned then, meeting his eyes. You're staying here? I don't see anywhere else to go. Then you'll need a plan. If your uncle's death wasn't natural, he cut her off with a look. You think someone killed him? Nora didn't blink. Men don't abandon property like this unless they can't help it. Someone wanted him gone, and they'll want you gone too. Caleb rubbed a hand over his jaw, the day's stubble rasping. Then I reckon I'll need more than a hammer and a feed bucket. I can shoot, she said simply. He raised an eyebrow. You any good? Good enough that you're still standing to ask. The edge of her smile didn't reach her eyes. Caleb chuckled despite the chill in his gut. All right, Doc. We'll keep watch together. They took turns through the night. Snow fell steady, muting every sound until the world seemed wrapped in cotton. Around midnight, Nora dozed in the tack room, while Caleb paced the yard. The sky was bright with moonlight, the kind that turns snow to silver. He found himself standing by the well again, the same handprint faint now beneath a crust of ice. He bent to look closer and saw another mark beside it. Hoofprints, smaller than the mare's, leading away toward the northern ridge. The foal hadn't left the barn. A chill that wasn't the wind crawled up his spine. He followed the prints a few paces before they vanished into drifts. When he turned back, the house stood outlined in moonlight, every window dark except one, the upper left flickering. He froze. He hadn't lit any lamps there. A shadow moved across the glass. He reached for his revolver and ran. Inside, the stairs groaned under his boots. The flicker came from the end of the hallway, spilling from the door of what had once been a bedroom. He pushed it open with the muzzle of his gun. The lamp sat on a dresser, wick low, and in the dust on the mirror, words had been scrawled with a finger. Keep them safe. The same words carved into the back of the door downstairs. Caleb's hand shook. He turned the lamp wick higher. The message gleamed fresh in the soot. Someone had written it within the hour. He spun toward the hallway, expecting movement, but the house was empty. The wind moaned through the broken window, and snow drifted in across the floorboards. Nora's voice came from behind him. Caleb? He lowered the gun, heartbeat pounding in his ears. Someone's here, he said, or was. She stepped beside him, eyes on the mirror. What does it mean? Maybe my uncle. Maybe someone who knew him. He looked out the window. The ridge stood black against the moon, quiet and waiting. But they sure as hell want these horses protected. Nora crossed her arms, thinking. Then that's what we do. He met her gaze. You sure you're not scared off yet? I've seen worse ghosts than this, she said. And they were human. They left the lamp burning that night, its glow spilling across the frozen yard. In the barn, the mare stamped once, restless. The foal stirred but didn't rise. Caleb sat by the door, revolver across his knees, watching the light tremble against the snow. For the first time since he'd ridden through the gate, he felt something heavier than fear settle inside him. Responsibility. This place wasn't just ruin. It was a promise. Before dawn, the wind carried a sound from the ridge, a single, distant shot. Caleb's eyes snapped open. The coffee pot beside the dying fire was cold, and frost had crept across the barn door hinges. For a moment, he thought he'd dreamed it, that the echo of gunfire was just the ghost of war memory, something left over from the frontier's rough years. Then the mare snorted, ears stiff, eyes wide. The foal pressed itself into her flank, trembling. He rose, slipping on his coat. Nora stirred on the cot in the tack room, her hair falling loose across her cheek. She looked up as he strapped on his revolver. You heard it too? She asked, voice still rough from sleep. He nodded. Came from the ridge. Just one round. Nora pulled her boots on, the sound of leather soft in the half-light. Could be a hunter. Not in this weather, Caleb said. Not before dawn. They saddled up without speaking further. Snow crunched under the horses' hooves as they rode out. The air was sharp enough to sting. The horizon barely blue. Up on the ridge, the world stretched out in shades of white and silver. They found the tracks easily. One horse, fresh, coming from the north. Caleb swung down to study them. Heavy rider, wore spurs. Nora looked down the slope toward the ranch. Headed straight for your fence line. Then let's find what he left. By the time they reached the bottom of the ridge, daylight had begun to break. The valley seemed peaceful again. The quiet kind of peace that comes after something has already happened. Caleb spotted it first. A wooden post lying flat across the snow. The wire snapped clean. He dismounted, kneeling beside it. A sign leaned crooked against the fallen post, scrawled in black paint. Whitford claim. Trespassers will be removed. Silas Whitford, Caleb muttered. Didn't take him long. You know him? Nora asked. Everyone does. Owns half the mines between here and Thermopolis. He's got more lawyers than cows. She frowned at the black lettering. And he thinks he owns your land? Caleb rose, brushing snow off his gloves. He's tried before. My uncle told me once Whitford wanted to buy this spread for water rights. Guess he didn't like hearing no. Nora squinted toward the west pasture. If he's breaking fences, he's sending a message. Caleb tightened his jaw. Then he's about to get an answer. They followed the fence line another quarter-mile and found more signs of trespass. Hoof prints, boot tracks, a broken lantern left half buried in snow. Whoever came through wasn't hiding their trail. When they got back to the ranch house, the front gate had something new nailed to it. A paper folded under a nail, its edges flapping in the wind. Caleb tore it free. Notice of eviction. Property of Silas Whitford Industrial Holdings. Occupants to vacate within 7 days. Below it, in small script, filed with Sweetwater County Office by Deputy Marshal J. Collins. 7 days, Nora read aloud. That's nothing. He won't wait 7, Caleb said. He wants me gone before I can prove this land's mine. Nora took the paper from him, folding it carefully. Then we used those 7 days to find proof. He looked at her. You really mean to stay? She shrugged. You've got a herd worth saving. I'm not letting a man like Whitford decide which animals deserve to live. Her tone was firm enough that Caleb didn't argue. They spent the next hours repairing the damaged fence. Each nail strike echoed across the cold field. The mare stood nearby, watching as though she understood. Every so often the foal would dart close, curious, before Nora gently pushed it back with a laugh. Smart little one, she said. Already thinks it owns the place. Better learn quick, Caleb said. World's not kind to what can't defend itself. Nora looked up from her work. You sound like you're talking about more than horses. He didn't answer. By afternoon, they'd finished the fence and headed back. The light was fading to that golden hue that makes everything look half-remembered. As they reached the barn, Caleb noticed something odd. Hoof prints circling near the well, deeper than a horse at rest. Whoever had been watching them last night had returned. He knelt, tracing a gloved hand over the pattern. Same size boots, he murmured. He's been close enough to count our nails. Nora scanned the tree line. You think he's Whitford's man? Or worse, someone who knows this land better than either of us. Before she could answer, a rifle cracked from somewhere beyond the cottonwoods. The shot splintered the fence post beside Caleb's shoulder, wood chips stinging his cheek. Down, he shouted. They dove, behind the trough, hearts pounding. Another shot rang out, this one closer. Whoever it is, they're trying to scare us off, Nora said between breaths. or make sure we don't fight back." Caleb's voice was steady, too calm for the tremor in his hands. "Stay here." He moved along the barn wall, revolver drawn, snow soaking his knees. The silence that followed felt thick as oil. Then he caught a flicker, a man on horseback near the ridge, coat snapping in the wind. Caleb aimed but didn't fire. The man raised a hand, 2 fingers to the brim of his hat, almost a salute, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Nora came up beside him, her face pale under the brim of her hat. "You saw him?" "Enough." Caleb holstered the gun. "He wanted me to see him." "Why?" "So I'd know who owns the night," Caleb said quietly. They stood together for a long moment, listening to the mare's restless pacing inside the barn. The foal whickered, sharp and scared. "We can't keep fighting in the dark," Nora said finally. "We need help." Caleb exhaled. "There's a sheriff in Milestone, 15 miles south. Boone Carter. Used to run cattle with my uncle before he took the badge." "Then tomorrow we ride," Nora said. But that night, the storm returned. Snow came hard, sideways, howling through the rafters. They had to barricade the barn doors to keep them from tearing off their hinges. Inside, the air was warm with horse breath and the smell of smoke from a single lantern. Caleb sat against a bale of hay, staring into the dim light. "He's going to keep coming," he said. "Men like Whitford don't send warnings twice." Nora handed him a tin cup of coffee. "Then we don't wait for the third." He met her eyes, and for the first time saw not just grit, but something gentler, an understanding that came from too many battles survived alone. "Doc," he said quietly, "if this goes bad—" "It won't," she cut in. "Not while I can still hold a rope or a gun." He nodded, more to himself than her. Outside, the wind screamed across the valley, rattling the barn roof like the sky itself was coming apart. When it finally died near dawn, a strange hush settled over the ranch. The world felt wiped clean, everything blank but for one thing, a new shadow painted across the snow by the front fence. Caleb stepped out and froze. Someone had driven another post into the ground overnight, tall and sharp. Nailed to the top was a strip of leather cut from a saddle. Burned into it, clear as day, was a cattle brand. Below it, in black paint, the words, "Get out, or we'll finish what your uncle started." The leather strip swung a little in the wind, making a sound like an old throat clearing. Caleb felt the cold settle in his bones as if the message had burned through to the marrow. He set his jaw, spat into the snow, and tore the notice from the post. It crumpled in his fist, meaningless as a scrap of paper and heavy as an indictment. Nora stood beside him, hands tucked into her coat, breath fogging in little ghosts. "They're trying to make this personal," she said. "They are," Caleb answered. His voice felt hollow against the wide valley. "They want me scared. That's the first move they always make." He carried the tacked notice back into the barn like a small trophy of defiance, then banged it against a beam until the black paint flaked. The mare watched, ears pricked, as if she understood the meaning of threats better than people did. The foal nosed at the scrap of paper, curious and unafraid. They paced a plan over stale coffee and yesterday's biscuits. Boone Carter, the sheriff, might be a man of honor, but he answered to a county and a ledger. Whitford answered to nothing but a ledger and a hunger that had bulldozed a 1,000 promises. The pair of them would need more than papers and pleas. "You ever heard tell of a back trail?" Nora asked, molding her coffee cup with cold fingers. "A place people use to move stock where no one else looks?" Caleb blinked, the memory sharp as a flint. "There's a cut under the East Ridge. My uncle used to ride it in summer when water was low. It's narrow, tucked behind the shale. Not many know its mouth. Keeps the herds out of sight." "Then we find it," Nora said. "If Whitford's men are watching the obvious gates, We'll move the herd where they won't expect." He let out a breath he'd been holding. It was a dangerous idea, moving animals under threat, but it felt like the only honest one. If the herd had value, it should be protected. If the land held secrets, they'd better learn to read them before Whitford burned the book. At first light, they saddled and rode low across the frost. The world was pale and large, sky folding over like a blanket. The mare plodded steady, breath steaming in the cold. Ash, he'd started to call the mare that on a whim for the gray line along her flank, walked at his side, ears forward, like a scout who remembered rivers and the smell of rain. The cut Caleb remembered was true to his memory. A narrow throat between two outcrops, a ribbon of scrub that whispered of old water channels. They followed it single file, boots soft, voices little more than the sound of breathing. The trail dropped and wound, the wind folding itself away until it felt as if they had slipped inside the back of the world. Then Ash stopped. She planted her front feet, head high, nostrils flared. Her muscles pulsed under hide like a coiled thing. Caleb slid from the saddle and walked forward, palms open, feeling the old instinct that comes with years around animals. Listen to what they tell you. There, half hidden in a hollow, a line of bodies moved slow as the shadow of a cloud. Horses, dozens of them, some freckled, some liver chestnut, some nearly black. A whole herd huddled in the lee of the rocks. They weren't wild shapes. They bore bridles worn smooth and the calm of animals accustomed to human hands. A chestnut stallion lifted his head and watched them as if remembering names. Caleb's throat closed. He'd thought there were only a handful, mare and foal, the thin gelding in the north stall. But here were the rest, more than he imagined, tucked into the valley like sleeping kings. Someone had kept them alive and hidden, tended water and feed, left them enough hay and scraped troughs. It offered a kind of miracle and a kind of question. Who had done it? And why had they vanished? Nora moved through the herd with a quiet authority, whispering to them and passing a hand over rib cages that should have been hollows. "They've been managed," she said without looking up. Someone kept watch. Someone who knew what they were doing. Caleb's eyes searched the sheltering rocks. Tangles of rope, a crude windbreak, and a few scattered bits of tack suggested a human presence not long gone. Fresh cigarette butts lay crushed under a pile of brush. The smell of smoke stayed in the air like a memory of campfires. He knelt to examine the ground. Tracks, small and booted, led away toward a cleft where a slant of sunlight broke through. The prints were fresh. Someone had been here after the last snowfall and had left by a path that twisted toward the north hollow. He followed them a little way, heart hammering like a trapped thing. At the edge of the cleft, tied to a thorny bush, hung a leather journal, its pages winged and damp. Caleb untied it with hands that didn't want to tremble and opened to a page smeared with ink. The handwriting was cramped but deliberate. "Keep the water clean. If anyone comes, move the mares behind the shale. Jeremiah promised we'd keep them until the rightful hand came. If you read this, tell him they're still breathing." William S. Caleb's fingers went cold. William Santos. The name jumped like a stone against a glass memory. The old man who'd once worked with his uncle. He'd told stories to Caleb as a boy, patient, grizzled, the kind of man who loved animals better than goods. He'd been the sort to disappear into town with his pockets empty of pay and full of the communal food he'd taken to a neighbor. "William?" Nora breathed. "He kept them." "He did," Caleb said. "He promised my uncle. Said he'd keep to the oath till the heir came. Then he left for good reasons," Nora said. "Or he was forced." Her jaw set like iron. Either way, he didn't abandon them. They followed the tracks where they led, down a narrow cleft and under a low arch of rock. At the bottom, tucked out of sight, they found a tiny cabin, no more than 4 walls and a roof. Smoke curled from a thin chimney. Herbs hung from the eaves. A pair of boots sat by the door, worn smooth. A battered kettle rested on a flat stone. Someone had been living here, recently. Caleb stepped forward and found signs of departure rather than theft. A cup beside the stove, a blanket folded stiffly on the bed, a note pinned to the wall with a knife. I can't stay. My daughter needs me in San Antonio. I'm gone to help her until I can't. Keep the water. Keep them safe. Will S. The handwriting matched the journal. William had left, but not in a panic. He'd left with purpose. A prayer tucked into his pocket. A list of duties he'd taught the herd. He'd gone to family. But if he'd left willingly, why had he not told Caleb? Why had the herd been hidden with no clear word to the man who'd inherit them? Maybe he thought hiding the herd was safer than telling anyone, Nora said softly. Maybe he thought your uncle's name would carry enough protection. Caleb stared at the note. At the small script of a man who'd folded his life into a few lines of ink, he felt a strange surge of relief braided with the iron taste of grief. The herd had not been abandoned. They had been loved and guarded like a secret in the chest. Someone had done the hard, quiet work of keeping them, day after day, through snow and through threat. Nora stood, boots crunching the frost. We have to get them proper food and medicine. If Whitford finds this place, it'll be over. Her voice held something that sounded like resolve and something like fear. Caleb folded the journal and tucked it into his coat. He had a map now, in the sense that paper could give a man a map. The journal's scrawled notes, the note pinned to the wall, the names William had used for the troughs and water pits. He had proof that someone had kept them alive and a path to where they sheltered. That was hope. The dangerous kind that asks you to act on it. He looked across the herd, at the stallion who eyed him with old patience, at mares who had held their foals in the dark, at the sound of animals breathing like a chorus finally being counted. Ash stood at his shoulder, head low, like a friend who'd carried him this far. Behind the rocks, the ridge stood blank and white. In the distance beyond that lay fences and men's claims. Whitford's flag would still fly over the mine if no one stopped him. Caleb let his hand close around the journal and felt the key at his neck, a cool circle against his chest. The promise his uncle had left was not an empty thing. It had been kept with hands calloused and kind. He looked at Nora. We move them tonight. She nodded, eyes bright with the same hard, foolish hope. We'll need quiet shoulders and quick feet. She smiled then, a small crack in the weather, and Caleb felt the first real warmth since he'd read the lawyer's letter in that boarding house room. As the sun slid low, they set to work, mending halters, bracing wheels, cutting small bundles of hay, and mapping a route that hugged the rock and dipped where snow drifted deep. The herd watched with the calm curiosity of those who've learned people will do strange things in their name. They would move at dusk, under the last of the light, when the world softened and shadows could hide a man and beast both. When everything was ready, Caleb saddled Ash, looped rope over his arm, and handed Nora the journal. If anything happens, he said, throat thick, get this to Boone. Tell him William kept them. She tucked it under her coat, fingers warm. If anything happens to you, I'll tell him myself. Caleb laughed once, sharp. Then we better pray to the horses and the ridge. They slipped out that evening like two ghosts, leading the herd down the hidden trail. The world seemed to close around them, rock to their left, a sheer drop to their right, and the sky above stitched with the first diamonds of night. Ash moved sure-footed, like one who knew the path even when men did not. They had gone 3 bends when the sound came, many hoofbeats far off, not the measured step of a herd, but the gallop of men on purpose. Caleb's chest slammed cold. He hugged the mare's neck and whispered a prayer he hadn't said since his wife's unhappier days. "Move," Nora hissed, and the herd answered, bodies sliding between stones with surprising grace. They were almost past the choke when a voice cracked out like a whip from the ridge above. "Halt! There!" A lantern flared, and figures outlined themselves against the snow. 3 riders silhouetted at the trail's mouth. Whitford's men, or someone wearing his colors. The path narrowed to a breath. The herd tightened, pressed like a living knot. Caleb's hand went to his gun. The world narrowed to the ring of the journal under Nora's coat, the press of warm breath against his neck, the light above them, sharp, accusing, and close. 3 riders stood on the ridge, their lanterns swinging like eyes in the dark. The one in the middle raised a rifle and called down, "That's far enough, Porter!" The voice carried through the canyon like a blade through dry wood. Caleb knew it before the name even left the man's lips. Earl Brandt, Whitford's foreman, mean as barbed wire and twice as twisted. "Easy, Earl," Caleb shouted back, holding one hand up while keeping the other near his holster. "Ain't no need to start a war over animals that don't belong to your boss." "They belong to whoever can keep 'em," Brandt hollered. "Silas says you're trespassing. Says your uncle forfeited the claim when he died." Nora nudged her horse forward, her voice calm but firm. "That's a lie, and you know it. This land's still under Porter title. I've seen the deed." Brandt chuckled, low and mean. "Lady, a piece of paper don't stop a bullet." The men flanking him shifted in their saddles, restless. Caleb caught the glint of gun barrels through the snowlight. The herd behind them stirred, hooves crunching softly. One frightened mare nickered, setting off a ripple through the others. He felt the line tighten. One wrong move and the whole canyon would explode. "Listen, Brandt," Caleb said, his voice low and steady. "You shoot, and you'll start a stampede. These animals go over the cliff, and Whitford loses everything he's been after." The man on the left spat into the snow. "Maybe that's the point. No herd, no witnesses." That was enough. Caleb moved first, firing a single warning shot into the air. The report cracked like thunder off the rock walls. Horses reared. One of Brandt's men lost his balance and tumbled backward into the drift. "Go!" Caleb yelled. "Move the herd!" Nora slapped the reins, shouting sharp commands. The horses answered her voice as if they'd known her all their lives, surging forward through the narrow pass. Snow churned under their hooves. Caleb swung into the saddle, covering the rear as bullets snapped through the air around them. Sparks flew from stone where lead met granite. A round grazed Caleb's arm, hot and white. He gritted his teeth, leaning low against Ash's neck. "Come on, girl, don't quit on me now." They broke free of the canyon mouth and thundered into open country. The moon had risen, full, lighting the valley in silver. Behind them, Brandt's curses faded into the wind. When they finally slowed at the far end of the ridge, Nora was pale and breathing hard. Her hat hung by its strap, hair wild around her face. "You hit?" she asked. "Just a scratch." He tore a strip from his sleeve and tied it tight around his arm. "You and the herd all right?" She nodded, glancing back. The animals had settled, crowding together in the shallow basin. Steam rose from their backs like fog. "They're spooked, but alive." Caleb scanned the horizon. No movement, no lights, just the long stretch of land rolling toward the timber line. "We'll camp here till daylight. They won't follow us far tonight. Not with that storm coming in." The wind had turned again, carrying a dry whisper that promised snow. They built a small fire behind a rise hidden from the ridge. Nora cleaned his arm with whiskey and a strip of linen from her bag. Her hands were steady, though her eyes betrayed the tremor underneath. "Whitford's not just after water," she said. "He's after something else. He sent killers, not lawyers." Caleb winced as the alcohol hit raw skin. "He's always wanted the land. Maybe he thinks the herd's worth more dead than alive. Nora shook her head. No, there's more to it. Your uncle's journals, William's notes, they talk about a spring under the shale. Fresh water unclaimed. Whoever owns it controls half the county's grazing rights. Caleb looked up sharply. You telling me these rocks hide a fortune? I'm telling you they hide life, she said, and Whitford will burn everything to own it. He sat back, the firelight flickering across his tired face. Then we dig in. We protect what's ours. Nora met his gaze. You can't fight a man like that alone. I won't be alone, Caleb said, nodding toward the mare. Ash stood at the edge of the firelight, head high, watching the dark as if daring it to move. Not while she's breathing. They took turns keeping watch. The cold deepened, the kind that makes metal stick to skin. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called and was answered by another. The herd shifted now and then, restless but steady. Near dawn, the snow began, slow flakes drifting down like the ashes of an old world. Caleb sat beside the fire, staring into the coals. He thought of his uncle, of William Santos, of the quiet hands that had kept the herd alive all those months. He thought of Whitford and the way greed could twist a man into forgetting where he came from. Nora stirred from her blanket. You're thinking too loud, she murmured. Just wondering how far this fight's gonna go, he said. She poured him the last of the coffee from the tin pot. Far enough to matter. The words sat between them a long moment, carried on the smell of wood smoke and frost. When the storm finally broke, it came fast. Snow whirled sideways, erasing their tracks, burying the fire, sealing them into a world of white noise and cold breath. They moved the herd into a stand of firs for cover, working wordlessly. By mid-morning, the wind had eased. The world was silent again. Caleb climbed a low rise to scout the trail back toward Whitestone. What he saw stopped his breath. Down in the valley, smoke rose from the direction of the ranch, thick, black, hungry. Nora came up beside him, eyes wide. Caleb, the barn. He didn't answer. He was already running. They left the herd under the trees and pushed their horses hard down the slope. The closer they came, the thicker the smoke. When they reached the yard, the sight gutted him. The barn engulfed, flames licking through the rafters, sparks flying into the wind like stars torn loose. Caleb leapt from the saddle, but Nora caught his arm. You can't go in! My uncle's papers, William's notes, they're in there. The roof's coming down! A section of beam collapsed with a crash that shook the ground. The heat was unbearable, the air alive with sparks. Caleb stumbled backward, choking on smoke. Through the roaring, he thought he heard the mare's call, a desperate, low sound that rose above the fire. Then he saw her, Ash, half wild with fear, struggling at the gate. The foal was inside the burning stall. Caleb! Nora shouted, but he was already moving. He tore off his coat, threw it over his head, and plunged into the barn. The world turned to flame. The heat bit through the fabric. Smoke clawed at his lungs. He kicked open the stall door and found the foal crumpled near the wall, coughing weakly. Easy, little one, he rasped, grabbing the rope halter. He pulled the foal upright, muscles screaming, and half dragged, half carried it through the blaze. Ash's cry guided him to the door. He stumbled out just as the roof collapsed behind him. Nora was there, grabbing his shoulder, helping him clear the smoke. They both went to their knees in the snow, gasping. Ash pressed her nose to the foal, checking every inch as if counting the cost. Caleb looked back at the ruins, the barn nothing but a skeleton of charred beams and falling embers. Everything inside, gone. Nora rested a hand on his back. You did what you could. He stared at the fire until his eyes burned. No, he said quietly. Not yet. They wanted this to break us. but all they did was wake me up. The snow kept falling, blanketing the ashes until the world went still again. By morning, the barn was nothing but black bones under a white shroud. The smell of smoke lingered like a ghost that refused to leave. Caleb stood where the doors used to be, boots half buried in the drift, watching the steam rise from the ruin. The horses huddled near the corral, silent except for the occasional snort. Ash's flank trembled from exhaustion, but she stayed pressed close to the foal. Nora came up behind him, her scarf drawn over her face. "They meant to kill everything," she said quietly. "You, the herd, the proof, gone in one night." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They took the barn," he said, "not the fight." He turned away, eyes fixed on the main house. The old building loomed gray against the snow, windows blank and cold. "My uncle kept records," he said. "Bills of sale, letters, something that proves this land's ours. He wasn't a fool. He hid it." Nora nodded once. "Then we find it before Whitford's men come back." Inside, the house was colder than the yard. The air smelled of damp wood and long neglect. Caleb lit a lantern, the light crawling across peeling wallpaper and empty frames. Every footstep stirred a cloud of dust, as if the place had been holding its breath since Jeremiah Porter's death. They started upstairs. The hallway was narrow, lined with doors that opened into rooms filled with broken furniture and wind. One door, at the far end, had a padlock hanging open on its latch. Caleb pushed it, and the hinges groaned in protest. The room beyond was small, tucked beneath the eaves, a loft space that might once have been a study. A writing desk stood beneath the window, its drawers half open, papers scattered across the floor like dry leaves. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, as if memory still lived in the wood. Caleb knelt by the desk. "He spent time up here," he said, running a hand over the scarred surface. "Used to write letters to Washington about ranch taxes, grazing rights, and water." Nora sifted through the papers, setting aside brittle envelopes and scraps of notes. "He wrote a lot about water," she said, scanning the faded ink. "Look, spring under the shale still clean. Don't let Whitford claim it." Caleb's heart kicked. "That's the spring William mentioned." Something thumped softly above them. Both froze. The sound came again, wood shifting in the rafters. Nora looked up. "Attic?" "Loft crawl," Caleb said. "You see that hatch?" He pointed to a square panel in the ceiling, the edges cut clean. A rope ladder hung beside it, coiled and dusty. Caleb pulled it down, the old rope creaking like an old man's bones. "I'll go," he said. "You're still bleeding," Nora reminded him. "Then I'll bleed slower." He climbed up, the ladder swaying under his weight. The attic was low and cramped, the roof slanting close enough to brush his shoulders. Cobwebs hung thick in the corners. His lantern painted the beams in amber light, catching the glint of something tucked between the rafters. A tin box, blackened with age. He reached for it, fingers numb from the cold. The lid came loose with a reluctant sigh. Inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers, tied with string, and a folded piece of oilcloth. Beneath those, wrapped in a handkerchief, was a small revolver, oiled, loaded, ready. Caleb swallowed. His uncle hadn't been preparing to die. He'd been preparing to defend something. He brought the box down. Nora cleared a space on the desk while he untied the bundle. The top sheet was a letter, dated 5 years ago. "To whoever bears the name Porter after me," it began in Jeremiah's steady hand. "If this reaches you, then I have failed to keep what was entrusted. Whitford will come for it. He knows about the spring and what lies beneath. But the land does not belong to him. It belongs to the herd and to those who keep it alive." Caleb read in silence, his lips moving slightly. William Santos agreed to stay until the rightful heir came. I've told him nothing of the documents. Too dangerous. But he knows where to look. If you find this, trust the water and the horses. They will guide you to what matters most. At the bottom, a signature. Your uncle, Jeremiah. Beneath the letter lay a folded survey map marked with inked lines, hand-drawn in a shaky grid. A red X sat near the ridge where they'd found William's cabin. Next to it, written faintly, Vault under the troughs. Caleb felt a jolt run through him. He buried something by the water system, he said. Nora bent close. The old troughs behind the barn, they survived the fire. That must be it. He looked up at her, the first spark of hope lighting his eyes in days. If he hid something there, it's what Whitford's been hunting. That spring, those papers, they prove this land's not his to take. Nora nodded. Then we dig before the snow does. They bundled the papers back into the tin box and carried it downstairs. The wind outside had died, leaving the world muffled in quiet. Under the gray sky, the ruins of the barn smoked faintly, but the troughs stood intact. Massive timbers lined with stone, now filled with snow. Caleb grabbed a shovel from the shed, his movements sharp with purpose. Nora joined him, using a broken plank to scrape the snow aside. Each shovelful revealed more of the trough's structure. Iron bands, solid oak, worn but whole. Then the shovel struck metal, a hollow ring. Caleb dropped to his knees, clawing the packed dirt with his hands. Beneath the trough's base lay a trapdoor made of iron, the hinges set deep in the earth. A keyhole sat in its center, the metal dark with age. He reached beneath his shirt, pulling the old iron key from its cord around his neck. It was the same one that had opened the ranch gate. He slid it in. The lock turned with a groan, and the hatch creaked open. Inside lay a small chest, bound in brass, edges tarnished. Caleb lifted it carefully into the light. His breath caught. The initials carved into the lid were the same as on the letter, J.P. He opened it slowly. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was a sealed envelope stamped with the crest of the territorial court. Alongside it sat a glass vial filled with clear water, corked and labeled in his uncle's handwriting. From the spring, proof of purity. Nora exhaled softly. He saved the water itself. Caleb turned the envelope over. It was addressed to Boone Carter, sheriff of Sweetwater County. He looked up at Nora. He trusted Boone to see justice done. Then that's our next move, she said. He nodded, closing the chest. Tomorrow, we ride to Milestone. Nora placed a hand on his arm. They'll expect it. Let them, he said, glancing at the smoldering ruins. This time, we won't be the ones running. The mare nickered softly, as if answering. The foal pressed against her side, its breath curling in the cold. Caleb rested a hand on the animal's neck, feeling the warmth, the pulse of life that had somehow survived fire and hunger and fear. He looked back toward the trough, now empty and open, the hidden vault laid bare. For the first time since he'd arrived, he felt the land itself stir, a quiet promise deep and sure, waiting to be kept. Above them, the last flakes of snow fell like ash, melting on the mare's mane before they could settle. By dawn, the wind had cleared, leaving the world sharp and brittle under a pale sky. The trail to Milestone stretched out ahead of them, a ribbon of frost winding through low hills and sagebrush, every sound swallowed by the cold. Caleb rode in silence, the small brass chest lashed to his saddle. Nora followed close, her scarf pulled high, eyes scanning the horizon for riders that didn't belong. It was mid-morning when the first rooftops of Milestone appeared, a cluster of wooden buildings squatting along Kyasuan, the frozen creek. Smoke rose from chimneys, twisting slow into the air. The town looked harmless enough, but Caleb's gut stayed tight. He'd been gone long enough to know that quiet didn't mean safe. They tied the horses outside the sheriff's office. The bell above the door jangled as Caleb pushed it open. Inside, a potbelly stove hissed and clanked, filling the room with the smell of scorched coffee. Sheriff Boone Carter looked up from a ledger, gray beard trimmed, hat hanging on the wall behind him. He was built like a man who'd once been strong and never quite stopped. His eyes flicked from Caleb to the woman beside him, then to the bandage still tied around Caleb's arm. "Porter," Boone said slowly, "you're a long way from disappearing." "Couldn't stay gone forever," Caleb replied. He set the chest on the desk. "Found something at Whitestone. Thought you'd want to see it." Boone eyed the box like it might explode. "You look like a man who's been digging for more than fence posts." "Maybe," Caleb said. "Maybe I found what my uncle meant for someone honest to find." Nora stepped forward. "Mr. Porter's uncle left records, court-sealed documents proving Whitford's claim is a fraud. There's a map, a sample from the spring, his signature on both." Boone's brows lifted. He reached for the chest, unlatched it, and drew out the envelope. His thumb brushed the old wax seal, tracing the court insignia. "Jeremiah always said he'd have the last word," he murmured. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Problem is, Whitford doesn't plan on listening." The sheriff sighed, pushing the papers back into the box. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, son. Silas Whitford's been spreading coin across this county for years. Judges, deputies, freight captains. You're not just fighting a man. You're fighting the map he's drawn." "I don't scare easy." "I know." Boone met his eyes. "That's what worries me." He got up and walked to the window. Outside, a pair of miners led a mule through the street, its hooves striking hollow against the boards. "Word is Whitford's men were seen riding north yesterday. Maybe a dozen of them. If they're headed toward your place, they're not bringing flowers." Nora stepped closer. "Then stop them." Boone turned back, his expression caught between duty and weariness. "You think it's that simple? The man owns half the council. The rest owe him money. I can post a patrol, but by the time we ride, they'll already have torched what's left of Whitestone." Caleb's voice dropped. "Then what would you do?" The sheriff studied him for a long moment, then spoke quietly. "There's a storage loft in your uncle's barn, isn't there? He built it himself, thick timber, steel hinges. I helped raise that roof 20 years back. If you can shore it up, you've got a defensible position. But listen, don't go. Picking a gunfight, you can't win." "Wasn't planning to," Caleb said, though they both knew he was lying. Boone sat again, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'll ride out tomorrow. Give you time to clear the evidence from the ranch if it comes to that. I'll bring the papers to Judge Nolan myself, though it might take a week for him to act." "A week's too long." "That's the law's pace," Boone said. "You knew that when you came here." Caleb nodded, jaw tight. He picked up the chest and turned to go. "Caleb," Boone's voice stopped him at the door. "Your uncle believed in you. Said once that you'd either save that place or die trying. Don't make me tell his ghost he was right." Outside, the wind had picked up again, sharp enough to sting. Nora walked beside him in silence until they reached the horses. "You don't trust him," she said. "I trust him," Caleb answered. "I just don't trust the town he works for." They rode out before noon, taking the creek trail instead of the main road. The sky had turned the color of pewter. The land felt smaller, closing in around them. Halfway home, they stopped to water the horses at a frozen pond. The mare's breath rose in white clouds, her eyes rolling toward the ridgeline. Caleb followed her gaze. On the far slope, black specks moved against the snow, riders maybe half a mile off, following their trail. "Boone was right," Nora said softly. They're not wasting time, Caleb replied. Let's move. They pushed the horses hard, skirting the ridge and cutting through a narrow draw that funneled them back toward Whitestone. The light was fading fast, turning the snow pink and gold. Behind them, the riders drew closer, the sound of hooves faint but steady. By the time the ranch came into view, night had fallen. The house stood dark, the barn's charred frame like a skeleton against the horizon. Caleb rode straight for the troughs, where they'd left the iron vault open. He dismounted and pulled the chest from his saddle. "We can't stay here," Nora said. "They'll be on us any minute. We're not running again." Caleb crouched by the trough, shoving the chest into the cavity below. "If they want proof, they'll have to dig for it." The first gunshot cracked across the yard, echoing off the rocks. A bullet smacked into the house wall, splintering wood. Nora flinched. "They're here." "Get to the fence, Tom," Caleb ordered. "Take the mare and the foal behind the stone corral. Keep them low." She hesitated. "What about you?" He cocked his revolver, eyes fixed on the ridge where the muzzle flashes flared. "I'll make sure they regret coming this far." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She grabbed the reins and ran for the corral, the mare following with her head high and ears flat. Caleb ducked behind a broken wagon, breathing slow. Shadows moved at the edge of the yard. 4 men, maybe 5, fanning out like wolves. He fired twice, driving them back into cover. Snow flew with every step, every shot. He could feel the heat of adrenaline in his throat, the old rhythm of fear and fury taking hold. One man broke from the others, circling wide toward the house. Caleb saw the glint of a match, the flare of fire. "Not again," he growled. He sprinted forward, tackling the man before the torch could catch. They crashed into the snow, rolling. The man swung a knife. Caleb caught his wrist and drove his fist into the man's jaw. The body went limp. He barely had time to stand before another shot ripped through the night, slamming into the wagon beside him. Splinters grazed his cheek. He turned and fired back. The attacker yelped and disappeared behind the well. Then silence. Only the wind and the low groan of the well's rope against the beam. Caleb scanned the yard, heart hammering. The riders were gone, or hiding. He stepped carefully toward the well, revolver raised. That's when he heard it. A horse's snort, soft and uncertain. Boone's voice carried from the dark. "You picked one hell of a way to test my warning, Caleb." Relief flooded through him like warmth. The sheriff rode in slow, lantern raised. Behind him, 2 deputies followed, rifles ready. "You made good time," Caleb said. "I heard shots halfway down the trail," Boone replied, dismounting. His eyes went to the fallen man in the snow. "You all right?" "I'm fine," Caleb said, lowering the gun. "Just making a point." Boone knelt, checking the outlaw's coat. He pulled out a badge. Whitford's company brand stamped in brass. "They're not stopping. He'll send more." "Then let him." Caleb's voice was flat. "I've got enough fire left for all of them." Boone looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll post guards through the night. But listen to me, Porter. When this is over, you ride to town with me. We settle it legal, or it'll never end." Caleb wiped blood from his knuckles and glanced toward the corral, where Nora stood with the mare and foal under home, the stars. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tonight, I keep my promise." The sheriff followed his gaze and gave a slow nod. "All right then. Tonight, we stand watch." The lantern light flickered across the snow, casting long, thin shadows that stretched all the way to the burned barn. The wind rose again, whispering through the valley like a voice remembering its name. Caleb stood beside the corral fence, the cold cutting through his coat, his breath visible in the pale glow. Boone and his 2 deputies had spread out around the yard, lanterns swinging as they checked the perimeter. The storm clouds had blown east, leaving the sky vast and full of stars. The stillness after violence always felt too large, too quiet. Nora sat by the mare, wrapping the foal in a wool blanket. Ash stood protectively over it, her head lowered, eyes half closed but alert. The faint smell of smoke still clung to her mane. "She hasn't stopped watching the ridge," Nora said softly, when Caleb approached. "She knows more than any of us," Caleb replied. "They'll come again. Men like Whitford don't quit after one try." Boone joined them, snow crunching under his boots. "You're right," he said. "But we've got until daylight, maybe longer. I sent one of my boys to Milestone for reinforcements. Judge Nolan needs to see those documents before Whitford buries them in ash." Caleb nodded, though his gut told him the law would move too slow, as it always did. He glanced toward the troughs where the iron vault lay hidden beneath the snow. The chest was sealed inside, safe, for now. "Boone," Caleb said quietly, "if anything happens to me, you make sure that box gets to the judge, no matter what." The sheriff's eyes hardened. "You planning on something foolish?" "I'm planning on being ready," Caleb said. "That's all." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and something faintly metallic. Gun oil, maybe. Boone caught it too. His hand moved to his rifle. "They're not waiting for dawn," he muttered. The first shot cracked through the still air like a whip. Lantern glass shattered, plunging half the yard into darkness. The deputies hit the ground. Nora ducked behind the corral wall, shielding the foal with her body. "Positions!" Boone barked. His voice was calm but edged with steel. Figures moved along the ridge, half a dozen at least, their silhouettes ghosted by starlight. Caleb returned fire, his revolver barking loud against the quiet. The flash illuminated the snow, briefly turning it to gold. "Get to the porch!" Boone shouted. "Use the walls for cover!" Caleb fired twice more before retreating toward the house. Bullets tore into the railings behind him. Splinters stung his cheek, but he kept moving. Inside, he and Boone took positions by the windows. Nora dragged the mare and foal into the barn's shadow, whispering softly to keep them calm. Ash didn't panic. She stood firm, her body shielding her young one from the direction of the gunfire. Boone reloaded with practiced hands. "They're spreading," he said, "trying to flank." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we don't let them." He slipped out the back door, crouching low as he moved through the snow toward the side fence. The world was all breath and heartbeat and crunching ice. He could see them now, Whitford's men, faces wrapped in scarves, their rifles glinting faintly. Caleb raised his revolver and fired. One went down, crying out before silence took him. The others scattered. The snow muffled everything, sound, movement, even death. Then came the voice. "Porter!" Silas Whitford himself, his tone smooth and cold as iron. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble. I don't take kindly to thieves or liars." Caleb stepped out from behind the fence, gun in hand. "Funny, I was about to say the same to you." Whitford stood in the open, his long coat billowing. The lantern light caught the silver in his hair, the glint of gold on his vest buttons. Behind him, his men held torches, 5, maybe 6 of them. "You could have sold the place," Whitford said. "Could have walked away clean, but you had to dig. You had to pry up secrets better left buried." "What's buried on this land isn't yours," Caleb shot back. "It never was." Whitford's smile was small and cold. "You think the law will save you? The law signs my checks, boy. The judge drinks my whiskey. The sheriff—" He paused, smirking. "Well, we'll see where his loyalties lie." Boone's voice cut through the night. "Right here, Whitford. You should have stayed in town." Whitford's expression soured. "Ah, loyalty to the dead man's kin. How quaint." He raised a hand. "Burn what's left." His men moved forward, torches swinging. "Not this time," Caleb growled. He fired first, the shot taking one of the torches clean out of a man's hand. Boone's rifle cracked from the porch, dropping another. The yard erupted. Gunfire, shouting, hooves scattering. Nora ran to the troughs, kicking snow over the torches that fell near the vault. "Keep them off the water!" she shouted. Ash charged from the shadows, ears pinned, teeth bared. The sight froze one of Whitford's men in place long enough for Caleb to take him down. The mare wheeled, kicking snow and sparks into the air, her muscles slick with sweat and firelight. Whitford cursed, retreating toward the ridge. "You're a fool, Porter," he shouted. "You'll die in the dirt for a dream that won't feed you." Caleb stepped out into the open, gun still smoking. "Maybe, but at least it's my dirt." Whitford fired, a single deliberate shot. The bullet struck Caleb in the shoulder, spinning him back. Nora screamed his name. Boone fired again, the round grazing Whitford's arm. The man staggered, dropped his pistol, and stumbled toward the dark line of trees. His men followed, vanishing into the night like ghosts swallowed by the cold. The fight was over in moments. Only the wind remained, and the low, trembling whinny of Ash as she pressed against Caleb's side. Boone ran to him, catching his arm. "You still with me, son?" Caleb gritted his teeth, blood staining the snow beneath him. "Still here." Nora knelt, tearing open her satchel for bandages. "You're lucky," she said, voice shaking. "It missed the artery." "Luck's running thin," Caleb muttered, his breath fogging. Boone looked toward the ridge, jaw hard. "They'll regroup. Whitford's too stubborn to quit after one failed raid." Caleb forced a grim smile. "Then we finish this before he does." The sheriff studied him, then nodded. "You've got until sunrise. After that, I ride to the judge." Nora tied off the bandage, her hands trembling. "You can't fight him again like this." "I'm not running," Caleb said. "Not now. Not ever." Ash nickered softly, lowering her head until her muzzle brushed his uninjured arm. The warmth of her breath steadied him. Boone gathered his deputies, checking their ammo. "We'll take turns keeping watch," he said. "They might try to sneak back before dawn." But the attack never came. The night held its breath, frozen and still. By morning, the valley looked almost peaceful again. Caleb stood by the trough where the vault lay hidden, watching the first light crawl over the hills. He was pale, but his eyes burned with something steadier than pain. Purpose. "They thought fire would finish us," he said quietly. Nora looked at him. "And?" He glanced toward the herd. Ash stood tall beside the foal, steam rising from her coat, like smoke made holy. "They forgot that some things can't burn," he said, "not while they're still breathing." The first light of morning poured down the valley, soft and golden, turning the snow into a field of fire. The ranch looked fragile under it, half ruin, half resurrection. Boone's men were still asleep near the porch, rifles across their laps, their breath curling up into the cold air. Nora sat by the embers of the fire, her coat wrapped tight, watching Caleb from beneath the brim of her hat. He moved slowly, still stiff from the bullet wound. The bandage at his shoulder was dark at the edges, but he ignored it. His eyes were on the trough, on the vault beneath. "Boone rides for the judge today," Nora said softly. "I know." Caleb crouched by the trough, tracing his fingers along the iron rim. "If he gets there before Whitford does, we'll have a chance, but I can't count on the law alone." Jeremiah's letters. They talked about the spring, about the water under this land. He said it was the proof, but I think it's more than that. More than proof? He looked up at her. A promise. They dug as the sun climbed higher. The snow had hardened overnight, and the ground beneath it was iron cold. Caleb's every motion drew pain from his shoulder, but he kept at it, the shovel cutting into frozen earth with the rhythm of a man working against time. By midday, the shovel struck something hollow, a layer of flat stone laid with purpose. Together, they pried it up. Beneath was a pocket of dark soil, and within it, the faint sound of water trickling. Nora leaned close. It's still flowing. Caleb knelt, brushing aside dirt until he found the source, a narrow fissure running beneath the trough, lined with smooth rock. Water gleamed in it, clear as glass. The spring, he whispered. It's been running this whole time. He dipped his hand in, the cold shocking against his skin. This is what he wanted to protect, what Whitford wanted to own. Nora filled a small flask from her satchel. If this runs under the ridge, it's worth more than gold. Every ranch within 20 miles would need it. Caleb's voice was steady, almost reverent. Then it doesn't belong to any one man. The sound of hoofbeats cut across the quiet. They turned. Boone was riding down the ridge, snow kicking up behind his horse. His coat flapped in the wind, and even before he spoke, Caleb saw the tension in his face. "What happened?" Caleb asked as the sheriff dismounted. Boone's breath came in clouds. The judge's house was empty. He left town last night. Word is, he's gone south with Whitford. Nora went pale. They moved together? Boone nodded. Looks like Whitford paid him off to sign the land transfer in private. They're heading for Casper once it's sealed. No court in Wyoming will question it. Caleb's jaw clenched. Then we ride before they do. Not with that wound you won't, Boone said. You'll bleed out before you reach the county line. Caleb rose, his breath sharp with pain. Then I'll bleed on his contract if I have to. Boone looked at him a long moment. Then he sighed. All right, Porter. But you don't go alone. We'll take 2 horses and ride light. Nora, you stay here. Guard the vault, the herd, and the proof. I'm not staying behind, she said, standing straight. Boone gave her a look that carried years of command. Someone has to be here when they come looking. You're the only one I trust to hold this place. For a moment, it looked like she might argue, but then she nodded, her expression firm. You bring that paper back, she said to Caleb. You hear me? I'll bring it, he said, even if I have to tear it out of his hand. They saddled up by noon. Caleb mounted Ash despite Boone's protests, the mare tossing her head as if she knew what was coming. The foal whinnied as they rode out, its small voice cutting through the wind like a plea. Caleb looked back once at the ranch, the burned barn, the trough, the thin column of smoke rising from the chimney, and felt a pull in his chest, deep and certain. The trail south was long and bitter. The wind came down from the mountains in waves that stung their faces raw. They rode hard, resting only to water the horses at frozen streams. Boone kept a steady pace, but Caleb could see the worry in his eyes. By dusk, they reached a narrow pass where the snow gave way to red stone. The air was warmer here, heavy with the smell of pine. A campfire flickered in the distance. Whitford's men, 5 of them, guarding a covered wagon. Boone lifted a hand. That'll be them. Caleb drew his gun. Then let's finish this. Boone shook his head. Not yet. The judge has to be alive if we're gonna undo his signature. We get him clear first. They crept closer, using the ridge for cover. The voices around the fire grew distinct, men laughing, the clink of bottles, the snap of burning wood. And there, sitting stiffly beside the wagon, was a man in a fur coat, his hands bound. The judge, Boone whispered. Whitford sat across from him, coat buttoned, hat tilted low. His voice carried easily through the air. You'll get your payment, Nolan, once we reach Casper. Until then, keep your mouth shut. Caleb's blood burned. He was tired of hearing Whitford's voice, tired of the way it poisoned the air. He looked at Boone, who gave a single nod. They moved as one. Caleb came in from the east, Boone from the west. The first shot took the bottle clean out of a man's hand. The second dropped another before he could draw. Chaos erupted, Horses whinnied, firelight flared, and men shouted in panic. Caleb charged straight for the wagon. Ash's hooves thundered through the camp, scattering sparks. Whitford spun, firing wildly. The bullet grazed Caleb's thigh but didn't stop him. He leapt from the saddle, tackled Whitford hard, and the two went down in the dirt. "You should have stayed dead with your uncle's name," Whitford snarled, grappling for the gun. Caleb's fist met his jaw with a sound like breaking wood. "My uncle built this land," he hissed. "You just tried to steal it." They rolled through the snow, each strike slower, heavier. Finally, Caleb pinned him, pressing the revolver to his chest. "It ends here." Whitford spat blood, smiling even through the pain. "Then shoot, Porter. You kill me. You prove I was right. You're just another man fighting over dirt." Caleb hesitated, breath ragged. Boone's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't!" The sheriff had freed the judge, who stumbled toward them, coughing. "Let him face the law," Boone said. "That's what makes you different." Caleb looked down at Whitford. The man's eyes were wild, full of hate and something like fear. Then, slowly, Caleb lowered the gun. "I don't bury men," he said. "I bury lies." Whitford tried to speak, but Boone was already hauling him to his feet, binding his hands. "Judge Nolan," Boone said, his tone cold as the wind. "You're coming back to Sweetwater under arrest for conspiracy. You'll testify in full before the county court." The judge nodded weakly. "You'll have my word." Caleb climbed back into the saddle, blood dripping down his thigh. Boone looked up at him. "You all right?" "We'll be," Caleb said, "once I see Whitford answer for what he's done." They rode through the night, dragging the bound men behind them. When dawn broke, Whitestone lay ahead, smoke rising from its chimney once more, and Nora waiting by the fence. When she saw them, her eyes filled with relief. "You did it," she whispered. Caleb slid from the saddle, too exhausted to stand. "Not yet," he said, "but we brought back what belongs to this land." Boone lifted the sealed contract from his coat and placed it in Nora's hands. "Your ranch is safe," he said quietly. "The spring, the herd, all of it." Caleb looked out over the snow-covered pastures, the sun breaking through the clouds. The horses grazed in silence, the sound of their breathing mingling with the slow rhythm of the water beneath the trough. "It's not just land," he said softly. "It's what's left of all of them. Jeremiah, William, everyone who kept believing." Nora smiled faintly. "And what about you?" He looked toward Ash and her foal. "I'll believe when the foal runs free." The mare lifted her head, ears pricking toward the light. The world, for the first time in months, felt like it might forgive itself. By noon, the valley was blue and bright, the kind of winter day that looks gentle until the wind turns your breath to glass. Boone's deputies had bedded Whitford and his hired guns in the small shed by the cottonwoods, wrists tied, blankets thrown over them against the cold. Judge Nolan, shamed quiet, sat on the porch with a tin of coffee and his hat in his hands, staring at snow as if it could teach him a new language. Caleb moved slowly along the fence line, hammer and nails in his belt, shoulder bound tight. Every strike of the hammer sent a dull ache through his arm. But it was a clean pain, work pain, not the kind left by fire and loss. Nora kept to the herd, checking hooves, watching eyes, whispering to Ash until the mare's breath settled into something like calm. "You should rest," she said, when he reached the corral where the foal nosed her pocket for oats. "I will," he promised, then added with a wry tilt, "when the fences learn to mend themselves." She almost smiled. "The sheriff says the town wants a hearing. Folks want to know what happens to Whitestone now." Caleb leaned against the rail, looking over the pastures. "What happens is the same thing Jeremiah wanted. We keep it breathing." Boone joined them, his beard catching glints of sun. "Nolan's ready to talk. Says he'll stand in front of the town and say who paid him and why. The sheriff's eyes softened. You give folks a chance to do right. Sometimes they surprise you. Sometimes, Caleb said, gaze drifting toward the burned barn. The meeting was set for the next evening at the schoolhouse in Milestone. Word rode faster than horses. By dusk, wagons lined the street and lanterns burned in every window, miners with black-rimmed eyes, ranch wives with flour on their sleeves, kids with noses red from the cold. They all crowded in, stamped the snow from their boots, and let the room warm around the argument it had been built to hold. Caleb sat up front beside Boone, shoulder aching under his coat. Nora stood on the aisle with Ash's old halter looped over her arm like a banner of quiet insistence. Judge Nolan cleared his throat, the sound small and raw. I took money, he said, voice steady, because shame had nowhere else to go. I signed what I knew wasn't legal. Silas Whitford promised me I'd be helping progress. All I'd be helping was theft. He lifted the sealed contract Boone had pried from Whitford's pocket. I nullify this here now in front of you. I'll swear it again in Cheyenne if I have to. A murmur rose, half anger, half relief. A woman near the back called, "And the spring?" Boone nodded to Nora, who held up the little glass vial. Clear water caught lantern light and tossed it back into the rafters. This runs under Whitestone, Nora said. It kept the herd alive through the worst winter I've seen. Jeremiah Porter documented it. William Santos tended it. You all know what that means for a dry year. A miner in a torn coat stood. Means a man like Whitford shouldn't own a whole valley's breadth. Boone raised a hand for quiet. We'll form a water association, proper and fair, but first we settle Whitestone. Heads turned to Caleb. He stood slowly, the room's heat and history falling on his shoulders like a coat he had finally learned to wear. My uncle left me land, he said, voice even. But he meant me to inherit more than dirt. He meant me to inherit a duty. Those horses were waiting when I opened that gate. Half starved, half wild, all heart. I don't aim to sell them like ore in a vein. He paused, let the silence carry. I aim to keep them. I aim to keep whatever fall through the cracks lives finds its way to Whitestone. Call it a sanctuary if you want a name. A rancher rose, big-shouldered, weather-scored. Caleb tensed. Garrett had argued against him at the feed store 2 winters back. But the man cleared his throat and said, My youngest set down her chores to bottle feed a throwaway calf last spring. Learned more from that calf than she ever learned from me. I don't pretend to like change, Porter, but I can tell when a thing's right. He lifted a hand. You've got my vote. One by one, others stood. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, hat cocked, said she'd send scraps and biscuits twice a week. 2 miners offered to haul lumber when a new barn went up. A teacher volunteered her students on Saturdays. They need to learn more than letters, Somewhere in the back, a kid's voice piped up, Can I brush the horses? The room laughed, and the laughter broke something hard. Boone called for a show of hands. Lantern light made shadows dance across raised palms. A few stayed down, men who still saw a ledger where others saw a life. But most rose high, and the room felt brighter for it. It's settled, Boone said. Whitestone remains Whitestone, and the herd remains its own. He turned to Caleb. You get to write what comes next. Outside, the night had turned brittle again. Stars had their winter sharpness back, and the snow squeaked under boots. Caleb lingered by the schoolhouse steps, hat in his hands, breath fogging the air. Nora came to stand beside him. You did it, she said. We did, he answered. He could feel the ache in his shoulder, true as weather. But it's not a thing a man does once. It's a thing he keeps doing. Good, she said. I like work that doesn't end. They rode home slow, the world silvered and clean. The herd bobbed their heads when the gate swung, as if counting them back. Ash stepped forward with that soft authority of hers and touched her nose to Caleb's chest, where the key lay warm against his skin. Then she turned to the foal and nudged it toward the open yard. "Go on," Caleb murmured. "Show us." The foal took 2 awkward steps, then 3, then a sudden sprinter's leap that startled even itself. It bucked, tail flagging, legs too long, and joy too big for the body, thumb, that held it. It made a clumsy circle around the trough, skidded in the snow, righted, and took off again. The sound of its hooves on frozen ground was a drumline of pure life. Nora laughed, an unguarded, bell-clear sound that warmed the night better than any fire. Ash didn't chase. She watched, head high, ears following, as if blessing the ground beneath each step. When the foal tired and came back blowing hard, she drew it in with her neck and pressed her cheek against its withers like a prayer answered. Caleb leaned on the fence, the old boards cold through his coat, and let breath he didn't know he'd been holding leave him in a long white trail. The place looked different in the moonlight. Not smaller, not larger, just truer. The burned barn was still a wound. The house was still a drafty box of memory and plans. But the water whispered under the trough, and the herd stood whole, and the sky over Wyoming seemed, for one unarguable minute, to be okay with them being here. Nora touched his sleeve. "What now?" she asked, voice low, more invitation than question. "Tomorrow we start framing a barn," he said. "Day after, I ride to town and file the papers. After that, I write a sign so folks don't have to ask what this place is." She smiled sideways. "What will you call it?" He looked at the mare and the foal, at the trough and the ridge, at the wide white land that had nearly taken him and had now, against sense and odds, given him back to himself. "Whitestone Sanctuary," he said, "in memory of the ones who kept it breathing." A shape moved at the cottonwoods. Boone stepped out of the shadows with a lantern held low. "One more thing," he said, and his voice held that rare note of ceremony a working man saves for the few times it's needed. He held out a small oilskin packet. "Found this in William Santos's cabin when I sent a deputy to inventory. Must have missed it the first time." Caleb unfolded the packet. Inside lay a photograph. His uncle younger, eyes bright in a way Caleb had never seen. And beside him, a woman Caleb recognized with a start. His wife, Anna, years earlier, smiling in a summer dress, a hand resting on the neck of a gray mare that could only be Ash as a filly. On the back, in Anna's neat, looping hand, "For Jeremiah, thank you for teaching me to trust the quiet ones. Tell Caleb when he's ready, the horses will still be waiting." Caleb's knees went loose. The knight tilted, then righted. He traced the letters like a man reading scripture. Nora's hand found his and didn't let go. "She knew," he said, voice gone hoarse. "She knew all along." Boone tipped his hat and stepped away, lantern swinging, leaving them in the kind of silence a valley keeps for its own. The wind rose and gentled. The foal nosed Ash's shoulder, then glanced back at Caleb, some cross-current of attention passing between animal and man like a wire gone warm. For the first time since the drought took everything and the fever took more, Caleb felt what the old preachers meant when they said the word peace. Not the absence of trouble, but the presence of something steadier than fear. He slid the photograph into his coat over his heart, where the iron key already lay. 2 small weights, 2 true ones. "Tomorrow," he said again, to the horses, to Nora, to the stubborn land that had decided to keep him. "Tomorrow we build." And they did. The next dawn broke clean and cold, the kind of Wyoming morning that wakes even the stones. The valley was quiet, except for the steady sound of hammering, measured, rhythmic, almost musical. Caleb worked with one arm bound tight, his breath rising in clouds, sweat freezing on his collar. The smell of sawdust and fresh-cut pine filled the air, mixing with smoke from the stove Nora had coaxed to life inside the farmhouse. By mid-morning, the skeleton of the new barn stood against the pale horizon. Boone's deputies, long since turned volunteers, hauled timber while a handful of townsfolk, miners, ranchers, widows, even a few kids, showed up with food, nails, and hands willing to work. Every sound was proof that something lost had decided to come back. Whitford's men were gone, hauled south under guard. The judge's confession had been read to the county. Word spread through every camp and homestead from Milestone to Cheyenne. The man who tried to steal Whitestone was finished, and the land had chosen to breathe again. At the edge of the yard, Nora leaned on a fence post, hair escaping her braid. "You ever build a barn before?" she called. "Once," Caleb said, smiling faintly, "with my uncle. Didn't turn out half this pretty." "Pretty?" she laughed. "You think this is pretty?" He set a beam upright and grinned. "I think it will be." Boone rode up as the roof frame was set. He dismounted stiffly and joined them by the trough, where the spring's water still trickled beneath the ice. "Town voted this morning," he said. "They're naming it official, Whitestone Sanctuary. You've got tax exemption, county recognition, and more work than you'll ever want." Caleb wiped his hands on his coat. "Never thought I'd see a piece of paper that meant something good." Boone chuckled. "Guess there's a first time for everything." He nodded toward Nora. "You planning to run this place alone, or you got sense enough to ask for help?" Nora tilted her head. "Depends who's asking." Boone smiled. "I'm talking about the future, miss. A place like this doesn't stay alive on one man's grief or one woman's courage. Takes a partnership." She met Caleb's eyes. "Then maybe we'll start with that." The sheriff tipped his hat and rode off, his laughter fading down the trail. By the week's end, the barn was whole. Red boards against the snow, roof pitched to the wind, doors wide enough for any storm to pass through without breaking what stood inside. The herd returned to the yard, led by Ash, her gray coat catching the last of the light. The foal, now stronger, chased snowflakes like it believed they could be caught. Caleb stood in the doorway, the smell of pine resin and straw filling his lungs. He felt the weight of his uncle's key against his chest, the photograph of Anna folded close to his heart. He thought of the letter she'd written, the words she'd trusted Jeremiah to pass on. "Tell Caleb when he's ready. The horses will still be waiting." He was ready now. That night, the sanctuary's first fire burned in the new stove. People came from town, bringing stew, blankets, and stories. Music rose, an old fiddle tune somebody started without asking permission. Laughter echoed off the rafters, mingling with the soft nickers of the herd outside. Caleb sat near the doorway, watching it all, the warmth on his face, the ache in his shoulder less cruel than before. Nora sat beside him, her hands folded, her eyes reflecting firelight and something softer. "You did it," she said. He shook his head. "No. We did it. Boone, the town, the horses, even the ghosts." Nora smiled. "You really believe in that kind of thing?" He looked out into the night. Snow fell slow, silvering the trough and the ridge beyond. "I believe in what stays," he said quietly, "even when everything else is gone." She reached for his hand, and for once he didn't pull away. When the crowd thinned and the last wagon rolled away, the ranch went still again. The wind hummed low through the fence posts, the same sound it had made the first night Caleb arrived. He walked out to the corral, lantern in hand. Ash followed him halfway, her shadow stretching across the snow. The foal trotted beside her, unsteady but determined, testing its strength in the moonlight. Caleb leaned on the fence and whispered, "You're safe now. All of you." The mare blew softly through her nostrils, ears twitching as if she understood. She pressed her nose to his shoulder and stayed there until the cold bit at their breath. In the distance, the creek whispered beneath the ice. The same spring his uncle had fought to protect. The same water William Santos had guarded in secret. Caleb knelt and brushed snow from the trough's edge. The iron still held warmth where the firelight touched it. Beneath, the water gleamed dark and endless. "This," he murmured, "is what you built for, Jeremiah. For them, for me." He dipped his hand in the stream. The cold shot up his arm, fierce and alive. When he stood, the stars above the ridge shimmered like the eyes of the herd, quiet, steadfast, unbroken. Nora joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You think they'll keep coming? People, I mean. Animals?" He nodded. "They always do. The lost ones, the tired ones, the ones nobody wants. That's what this place is for." "And what about you?" she asked. He thought for a long moment, watching Ash lead the foal toward the barn. "I guess I was one of them," he said finally. "But I found my way home." They stood in silence, side by side, until the fire in the windows dimmed and the ranch settled into its heartbeat rhythm. The creak of the fences, the breath of the horses, the whisper of the spring. When Caleb finally turned toward the house, he stopped halfway and looked back. Ash stood at the barn's door, the foal tucked against her, both framed in golden light. She lifted her head, and for one breathless second, he could have sworn he heard her voice in the wind, low, steady, and full of something older than words. Then it was gone, carried into the night. He smiled. "Yeah," he whispered. "I hear you." And as dawn crept up from behind the ridge, painting the valley in soft gold, Whitestone stood whole again. Not just a ranch, not just land, but a sanctuary, born of fire and forgiveness, bound by faith in the living things that refused to give up. The wind swept through the gate, scattering the last ash from the burned barn, carrying it toward the open fields where the herd grazed. Somewhere in that breeze, faint but certain, came the echo of hooves and a woman's laughter, mingling like a promise kept. And as night fell, a breeze swept through Whitestone, carrying the sound of hoofbeats and hope across the valley. If this story found its way to your heart, tell me down below. Even a simple 0 or 1 lets me know you're still out there, riding with us. Don't forget to subscribe before you go. There are more tales waiting on the horizon, stories of cowboys, courage, and the quiet bond between a man and his horse. Until the next ride, keep your spirit steady and your saddle ready.